Two Bloody Sundays. Civil rights in America and Ireland. A letter from Duchess. In 1965, African Americans in Selma, Alabama, marched for the right to vote. In 1972, Catholics in Derry, Northern Ireland, marched against injustice in their own nation. Both peaceful protests ended in violence, and the events in both places became known as Bloody Sunday. On the surface, you might not be able to imagine what Derry and Selma had in common, but the Catholics in Ireland saw similarities in the struggles. They felt a connection with Black Americans in the southern United States. Both groups were fighting for their civil rights. Throughout history, the struggle for civil rights has not been limited to one time or place. These movements have influenced each other in important ways. Please join me in learning about Selma's impact on Northern Ireland. Join me in a journey that tells the story of the promise of freedom. Bloody Sundays. The morning of March 7, 1965 was cool and crisp. It was a good day for a march. 600 Black protesters gathered outside Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Selma, Alabama. The protesters were ready to walk the 54 miles to Alabama's state capital, Montgomery. They were protesting barriers that kept from voting. In the South, African Americans were often forced to take literacy tests or pay a poll test in order to vote. The protesters hoped the march would change this. Alabama's governor told the protesters that they could not march. He sent police officers and state troopers to Selma. The police was supposed to make sure the protesters did not leave their city. The protesters were prepared to make the journey anyway. The Edmund Batters Bridge was 6 blocks away from the church. The bridge was on the road to Montgomery. The protesters had to cross the bridge, but police officers stood in their way. White families stood alongside the road. They yelled at the protesters. The protesters faced the white officers. They were at a standstill. The protesters could not continue forward. The sheriff told them to run around. The protesters ignored him. They tried to walk forward in a single file line, but they were blocked. Officers started walking toward the protesters. The officers put on gas masks. They threw tear gas at the protesters. Tear gas causes breathing difficulties and temporary blindness. The officers hit the protesters with heavy wooden clubs. The crowd of white onlookers cheered. The officers then chased the protesters back to the church where the march had begun. At the end of the day, more than 50 protesters were injured. Television crews filmed the whole event. The assault on the bridge was televised that night across the United States. The media coverage turned the incident into a national civil rights issue. The Selma protest changed the course of the American civil rights movement. This event would become known as Bloody Sunday. Northern Ireland. 7 years after the Selma Bloody Sunday, a different Bloody Sunday occurred in Northern Ireland. On January 13, 1972, 10,000 Catholic protesters gathered in Derry, Northern Ireland. They were protesting mistreatment by British troops. British soldiers had arrested people they suspect were part of a Catholic resistance group called the Irish Republican Army, IRA. The soldiers held these suspects without trial. The protesters started to march toward Derry city center, but soldiers from the British Army had set up roadblocks. The roadblocks prevented protesters from reaching their destination.